Alright, as many of you know, I'm a Sony shooter, my main camera being the A7 IV. I've got a whole review on the A7 IV that you should go check out if you're interested. But today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be shooting with the Canon. This is the Canon R6 Mark II, and holding it is my friend Evan. Evan's been shooting for a few years now and has recently gotten into the wedding scene, so if you're into the Tampa area and need some photos done, hit him up. So I've got Evan's R6 Mark II in my hand with the adapted EF 24-70 Tamron lens, and he's going to be taking my A7 IV with the Tamron 35-150, and we're going to get an initial impressions on what it's like to shoot with a brand we're not used to. Before we do that, let's take a quick look at all the specs.
So this is the R6 Mark II. It's a 24 megapixel full frame camera. I've probably shot around 20 to 30,000 photos with it in the last 6 months over the course of 12 weddings. I don't have any gripes really, other than the lens selection. The autofocus is lightning fast. I believe it uses the same autofocus as the R3 and it rarely misses. Today I'm using the 24-70, or Ben's using the 24-70 Tamron lens that's adapted to the mount. The only thing I don't like about this camera is the mount selection. Sony E-mount has so many choices, but with the R6, all we're limited to is the RF native mount lenses. There are no third-party lenses available unless you want to adapt them from the older EF DSLR glass. I like it. I haven't had any problems with it, but I do wish there were more options.
The Sony A7 IV is a 33 megapixel full frame camera. Just like the R6 Mark II, it's a great hybrid camera and they come in right around the same price point. I really love this camera because it's got the Sony E-mount and they have really unique lenses like the Tamron 20-40 and the Tamron 35-150. I also have video reviews of both those lenses on my channel. I'll link them below. Now before we begin, I do want to state that both the Sony A7 IV and the Canon R6 Mark II are great cameras and you can't go wrong with either of them. Today we're not going to really be talking about specs, we're just going to be comparing what it's like to use and how it feels in our hands and more of an emotional standpoint on why or why not we like either camera. So with that, let's go take some photos.
So first impressions before even turning the camera on, it's bigger than I thought. Like I used to watch videos before I bought the R6 Mark II on if I wanted to get the Sony or the R6. Obviously I went with the R6, but it's a lot bigger than it made it look in the videos. The grip feels pretty good on the fingers, but it also feels pretty shallow in the back end. I definitely prefer the grip on the Canon. But so far it doesn't feel all that different. The button layout is fairly similar too. I like that, but I just don't like the grip as much.
All right, cool. So I just picked up the R6 Mark II. I definitely agree with what Evan said about the grip. There's definitely a little bit deeper, and my pinky doesn't get cut off here like it does on the Sony. That doesn't really bother me on the Sony. I actually find it helps give a little support, but I don't feel like I need that on the Canon. It's definitely lighter, but that could just be because how heavy the Tamron 35-150 is.
Always in the way.
Oh, there's a bunch of dog poop in here too.
Ew, bro. I don't know if I'd be touching that shit.
All right, so a lot of people say that Canon's got much better screens than the Sony, and I don't necessarily agree with that. Canon's got a thicker bezel and just a thicker looking screen, so visually it doesn't look as nice. The actual screen quality may be a little bit better, but nothing crazy noticeable, and I think visually the Sony screen looks less cluttered and less distracting, and it's just an easier screen to read quickly.
Play off what Ben said, after taking some photos with the Sony, I think I honestly prefer the screen a little more. The menu layout's a little easier to see than the Canon, it's less colored, it's pretty straightforward, and the back of the camera looks a little more true to life, where I think the Canon might be a little oversaturated. So Canon limits you to what you can actually map the buttons. I like that you can map them to anything on this. It's kind of annoying because there's some things I don't like about the buttons on my camera and you only get like 3 or 4 options and it's things you would never want to use for each button. I wish they'd fix that in a firmware update. I keep going to reach for the shutter and it's just not there. I think if I used it for a while I'd get used to it, but compared to where the grip is and where the shutter is, I don't really like it. It doesn't feel as natural as the Canons. It feels kind of tough to hold with one hand. I do a lot of one-handed shooting and weddings and stuff. I'll be like here, you know, grabbing things, adjusting lenses, holding light stands a lot of the time for like sparkler exits. and I just don't think I like the grip as much and where the shutter is, but it could be just because I'm not used to it.
While we're talking about grips, I really like the grip on the Canon. I'll be the first to admit it definitely feels better than the Sony. That being said, I don't like the buttons and dials placement as much as the Sony. I think the Sony buttons and dials feel way more intuitive and in the right place. My finger's always on the right dial when I need it, and this could be just from knowing the Sony better, but I really don't think it is, especially with the top dial here. On the Sony, it's right on your pointer finger and it's always ready on the grip. Having to reach for it up to the top of the camera really feels slow, and when I need to change settings fast, it's not intuitive. So I've gone back and edited all the photos from the Sony and the Canon, and they are super similar. The two big things I observed are the Canon files tend to lean a little cooler and a little more blue, while the Sony files are a bit warmer. I also find that the extra megapixels of the Sony can be quite noticeable when editing smaller details or doing larger crops. I think looking at these photos proved that color science is just overhyped. With a good edit, you can get either photo to look great and almost exactly the same as the other. All right, after an hour and a half of shooting on each other's cameras, we've already shared some thoughts with you, but now here are concluding thoughts. Overall, I really enjoyed shooting on the Canon, but I didn't enjoy it over my Sony. I was really worried I was going to shoot on the Canon and I was going to be like, oh, I should have got the R6 Mark II. And that wasn't the case. I'm still more than happy with my A7 IV, and I wouldn't want to switch to Canon. What did you think of using the Sony for your first hour and a half?
Yeah, so being a Canon shooter, I really didn't think I was going to like the Sony, but the overarching comment I have about it is kind of what Ben said. They're not all that different. I think you can't go wrong with either camera. I bought the R6 Mark II after watching a lot of reviews between the two of them, and I thought I would hate shooting with the Sony, but I think I could easily get used to it and use either camera. I didn't love the grip, and I'm not used to the menu and button layout, but I think I would get used to that pretty quickly and would have no problem using the Sony. After about a week, I think I could switch fully over. I do like the lens that I was able to use a lot better than any lenses offered on Canon.
The lens selection on Canon is a big reason to stay with Sony. There's just way more options on Sony, and you're not locked into the RF mount. I mean, hopefully Canon opens up their mount and stops suing companies who make RF lenses. But that being said, they do have some great RF lenses. I just think the E-mount's a better lens mount to invest in currently.
I think so too. That 35 to 150 with the A7 IV is a dream combo for any wedding photographer, portrait photographer, and if I had that set up, that's probably about all I would use if I was shooting Sony.
Yeah, for events, that's about the only lens I think you need. I was really hoping by the end of this video there'd be a clear winner, that the Sony was better for some types of photography and the Canon was better for others, and that wasn't the case because both cameras are very similar and can do the same things, and they do a great job at it. So it really comes down to personal choice. I highly recommend renting each camera before you buy. It's a lot of money to spend on a camera, and renting it will really make sure you're happy with your purchase. It'll give you a good taste of what each camera's like, and it'll help you make the most informed decision so you spend your money properly. For now, go out and shoot some photos. Enjoy.